What if I told you that one of the most dominant muscle car engines of all time was officially rated at just 335 horsepower? That's less than a modern V6 Camaro. Yet this engine routinely embarrassed Ford 26 Hemis and Ford 27 big blocks at drag strips across America. This is the story of how Ford pulled off one of the greatest sandbagging operations in automotive history and created a legend that still makes moper guys uncomfortable at car shows. And picture this. It's a humid Saturday night in 1968 at Detroit Dragway. A brand new Plymouth Roadrunner with a 426 Hemi pulls up to the line. The driver's confident. He's got Chrysler's ultimate weapon under the hood, the legendary Elephant motor. 425 horsepower, dual quads, the most feared engine in America. Next to him, a Mustang Cobra Jet rolls into the other lane. The Plymouth driver smirks. Ford's new 428, 335 horsepower? This'll be easy money. When the tree drops, both cars launch hard. By the 60-foot mark, they're dead even. The Hemi driver shifts into second, expecting to walk away, but the Mustang stays right there. Third gear. The Ford starts pulling. By the time they cross the finish line, the Mustangs won by 2 car lengths. 13.56 at 106 miles per hour. The Hemi ran 13.8 at 104. The Plymouth driver can't believe it. How did a 335 horsepower engine just beat his 425 horsepower Hemi? Nan, welcome to the world of the Ford 428 Cobra Jet, the most deliberately underrated engine in muscle car history. To understand how Ford created this giant killer, we need to travel back to early 1967. The muscle car wars were reaching nuclear levels. Pontiac had the 428 HO making waves. Chevrolet was dropping 427s into everything. Chrysler's Street Hemi was the undisputed king of the quarter mile. And Ford? Ford was getting its teeth kicked in. The 390 GT was respectable, but couldn't hang with the big dogs. The 427 was a race engine, too expensive, too temperamental, and too rare for the average buyer. Ford needed something that could run with Hemis, but sell for Fairlane money. Enter Bob Tasca. Tasca ran the most successful Ford dealership in New England, and he was tired of losing sales to Plymouth and Dodge. His customers wanted to go fast, and Ford wasn't delivering. So Tasca did what any reasonable businessman would do. He started building his own engines. His mechanics took a standard 428 Police Interceptor short block, the mundane big block Ford used in cop cars and luxury barges. But instead of the restrictive stock heads and tiny carburetor, they bolted on 427 low-riser heads, a 735 CFM Holly 4-barrel, and headers. The result was shocking. This cobbled-together engine was running low, 13s right out of the box. Tasca called his creation the KR8, and word spread fast. Street racers started showing up at his dealership wanting the magic combination. Hot Rod magazine got wind of it and published a feature. Suddenly, Ford headquarters had a problem. One of their dealers was building engines that embarrassed their factory performance cars. Ford executives flew to Rhode Island to see what Tasca was doing. After witnessing his Frankenstein 428 destroy everything in sight, they made a decision that would change muscle car history. They would build Tasca's engine, but they'd do it their way. Ford's engineers started with the 428 Police Interceptor block. This wasn't exotic. It was a workhorse design with 4.18-inch bore and 3.98-inch stroke. The block featured reinforced main bearing webs and could handle serious abuse. But here's where Ford got clever. Instead of using the standard 428 heads with their restrictive ports, they specified 427 low-riser heads. These heads had massive 2.09-inch intake valves and 1.66-inch exhausts. The ports were essentially racing-sized, flowing over 270 CFM on the intake side. One in the compression ratio was set at 10.6 to 1. Now, this might seem conservative when Chrysler was running 10.25 to 1 in the street Hemi, but Ford had a reason. They wanted this engine to run on pump gas without detonation. No special tuning, no octane additives. Just fill it up at any gas station and go hunting for Hemis. The camshaft was pure aggression. With 270 degrees of advertised duration on the intake and 290 on the exhaust, this wasn't a grocery getter profile. Lift measured 0.481 inches on the intake and 0.490 on the exhaust. The lobe separation angle of 115 degrees gave it that classic lumpy idle that announced serious intentions. This cam didn't come alive until 3,000 RPM, but when it did, it pulled like a freight train to 6,000 DOS. But the real magic was in the induction system. Ford developed what they called the 428 Cobra Jet Ram Air System. This wasn't just a hood scoop for show. The functional scoop fed directly into a sealed air cleaner housing, creating a genuine cold air intake decades before they became trendy. At speed, this system provided a measurable ram effect, cramming denser, cooler air into that massive 735 CFM Holley 4-barrel carburetor. Now, let's talk about that Holley for a second. 735 CFM might not sound extreme by today's standards, but in 1968, this was serious flow. Most street engines were running 600 CFM carbs. The Hemi's dual quads flowed about 650 CFM combined under normal driving. Ford's single massive Holley delivered instant throttle response and enough fuel to feed the beast all the way to redline. The exhaust system was equally impressive. Cast iron exhaust manifolds might seem primitive, but Ford's engineers designed these for flow, not cost-cutting. The manifolds fed into a true dual exhaust system with minimal restriction. The result was an exhaust note that was distinctly Ford, deep, aggressive, and unmistakably American. Nenford rated this combination at 335 horsepower at 5,200 RPM and 445 pound-feet of torque at 3,400 RPM. These numbers were laughable to anyone who actually drove one. Independent dyno testing revealed the truth. The 428 Cobra Jet was making between 410 and 420 horsepower at the crank. Some examples pulled even harder, approaching 430. The torque was equally underrated at close to 460 pound-feet. Why did Ford lie about the power? 3 reasons. First, insurance. A 335 horsepower car costs significantly less to insure than a 420 horsepower car. Young buyers could actually afford to drive these things. Second, NHRA class racing. The lower power rating put the Cobra Jet cars in more favorable classes where they could dominate. Third, Ford wanted to surprise the competition. Let Chrysler and Chevy think they were fighting a 335 horsepower engine, while Ford was bringing 420 to the party. The 428 Cobra Jet debuted on April 1, 1968. That's right, April Fool's Day. Chrysler and Chevy probably thought it was a joke when they heard the specs. They weren't laughing for long. The first Cobra Jet Mustangs started showing up at drag strips, and the results were devastating. These supposedly mild 335 horsepower cars were running consistent mid-13s at over 105 miles per hour. Indian professional drag racer Al Joniak got his hands on one of the first 428 CJ Mustangs. With nothing but slicks and open headers, he ran 12.91 at 109 miles per hour. That's with a car rated at 335 horsepower, remember. The automotive press went crazy. Hot Rod Magazine's test car ran 13.56 at 106.64 completely stock. Car and Driver managed 13.59 at 105. These times were faster than most 427 Chevys, and right there with the vaunted street Hemi. But here's where it gets really interesting. The 428 Cobra Jet wasn't just fast in a straight line. It was tractable. It was reliable. It would idle smoothly enough to sit in traffic. You could drive it to work Monday through Friday, then destroy Hemis on Saturday night. Try that with a solid lifter 427 Chevy or a temperamental Hemi. Those engines required constant adjustment, specialized knowledge, and premium fuel. The Cobra Jet just worked, and Enford installed the 428 CJ in everything they could. The Mustang was the poster child, of course. The Mach 1 and Cobra Jet Mustangs became instant legends. But Ford also dropped this engine into the Torino, creating the Torino Cobra. These intermediate muscle cars were sleepers. They looked like family sedans but ran like superstock drag cars. Mercury got the engine too, putting it in the Cougar Eliminator. Even the luxurious Mercury Cyclone could be ordered with the 428 CJ, creating one of the most unlikely street fighters of the era. The Torino Cobra deserves special mention. This was Ford's answer to the Plymouth Roadrunner, a no-frills budget muscle car. But while the Roadrunner needed optional engines to really perform, the Torino Cobra came standard with the 428 Cobra Jet. For $3,200, you got a bare-bones interior, manual steering, manual brakes, and one of the nastiest engines on the street. Car Life magazine tested one and called it large the fastest regular production sedan ever built by Ford.net. Production numbers tell the story of the 428 CJ's success. In 1968, Ford built 2,827 Cobra Jet Mustangs. That might not sound like much, but remember, this engine option had only been available for 8 months. In 1969, production exploded. Ford built 5,396 428 CJ Mustangs, 2,089 Torino Cobras, and hundreds of Cougars. By 1970, over 14,428 Cobra Jet engines had found homes in Ford products. The racing success was even more impressive. In NHRA Superstock, 428 CJ cars were virtually unbeatable. The combination of underrated power and favorable weight brakes made them giant killers. Hubert Platt's 428 CJ Mustang became the first Ford to win an NHRA national event in Superstock. Gas Ronda's 428 CJ Cougar dominated the match racing circuit. Don Nicholson's Eliminator, Aya Cougar, became one of the most feared funny cars of the era. But the 428 Cobra Jet's influence went beyond the drag strip. This engine proved a fundamental truth about performance that engineers still apply today. Airflow beats displacement. The 428 gave up 12 cubic inches to Chevy's 440 and 2 cubes to Chrysler's Hemi. But those 427 low-riser heads could flow more air than either competitor. And in the world of internal combustion, airflow is everything. Let's dive deeper into why those heads were so special. The 427 low-riser heads were originally designed for NASCAR competition. The ports were huge, nearly square in cross-section, and designed for maximum flow at high RPM. The valve sizes were massive for the era. That 2.09-inch intake valve was bigger than what Chevy used on its rectangular port big blocks. The combustion chambers were engineered for optimal flame propagation, with the spark plug positioned for complete efficient combustion, and Ranford's engineers made one crucial modification for street use. They machined the chambers to 72 C, up from the 427's tighter chambers. This reduced the compression to that pump gas-friendly 10.6 to 1. But here's the genius part. The slightly lower compression actually helped power production. The engine could run more aggressive timing without detonation. It could pull harder in the mid-range where street racing actually happened. While Hemis were pinging on 94 octane, the Cobra Jet was pulling cleanly on regular .NEN. The intake manifold was another piece of engineering excellence. Ford used a cast-iron dual-plane design that looked pedestrian but performed brilliantly. The runners were sized to maintain velocity while providing adequate volume. The plenum was designed to distribute air evenly to all 8 cylinders. This wasn't a high-rise race manifold that made peak power at 7,000 RPM. This was a street fighter that delivered brutal torque from 2,500 to 6,000 RPM. The bottom end was overbuilt in typical Ford fashion. The crankshaft was a nodular iron casting, not as exotic as a forged steel piece, but more than adequate for street use. It featured rolled fillets for strength and was balanced to remarkably tight tolerances for a production engine. The connecting rods were shot-peened and magnafluxed from the factory. The pistons were cast aluminum with a dish to achieve that 10.6-to-1 compression. They featured full floating pins and were weight-matched to minimize vibration. N. The oiling system showed Ford's attention to detail. The 428 CJ used a high-volume oil pump feeding through enlarged passages. The main bearings were Federal Mogul units with increased crush for better retention. A windage tray kept oil from being whipped into foam by the rotating assembly. Even the oil pan was special, a deep sump unit that held 7 quarts and featured internal baffles to prevent oil starvation during hard acceleration. An Enford offered the 428 CJ with both manual and automatic transmissions. The manual was either a top-loader 4-speed or the bulletproof T10. Both could handle the Cobra Jet's torque without complaint. The automatics were C6 units with special calibrations for performance. The torque converters stalled higher than stock, around 2,800 RPM, to get the engine into its power band quickly, and its and rear axle ratios were critical to the 428 CJ's success. Ford offered everything from 3.25 highway gears to 430 drag strip specials. Most street cars came with 350 or 3.91 gears. The 3.91s were the sweet spot, quick enough for devastating acceleration but still streetable. With 3.91 gears, a 428 CJ Mustang could hit 60 miles per hour in under 6 seconds and cross the quarter mile in the mid-13s. Here's something that might shock you. Despite its performance potential, the 428 Cobra Jet was remarkably economical for a big block muscle car. Highway fuel economy could reach 14 miles per gallon with conservative driving. Compare that to a Hemi struggling to get 10 mpg or a 454 Chevelle drinking gas like it was free. The 428 CJ's efficiency came from its excellent combustion characteristics and relatively mild cam timing at cruise RPM. The 428 Cobra Jet also spawned one of the most legendary variants in muscle car history, the Super Cobra Jet. Available when you ordered 3.91 or steeper gears, the SCJ added forged pistons, stronger connecting rods, a mechanical lifter camshaft, and an oil cooler. Rated at the same hilarious 335 horsepower, the SCJ was actually making closer to 450. These engines were essentially factory race motors with license plates. And the Super Cobra Jet's mechanical cam was a thing of beauty. With 280 degrees of intake duration and 296 on the exhaust, this was a serious piece. Lift increased to 0.500 inches on the intake and 0.520 on the exhaust. The idle was pure intimidation, a choppy, angry sound that promised violence. But the real difference was up top. While the hydraulic cam Cobra Jet signed off at 6,000 RPM, the SCJ pulled hard to 6,800. The aftermarket potential of the 428 CJ was extraordinary. With basic modifications, headers, cam, and carburetor tuning, 500 horsepower was easily achievable. Serious builders could push these engines past 600 horsepower while maintaining street manners. The strong bottom end and excellent heads provided a foundation that could handle serious power increases without major internal modifications. And end-drag racers quickly figured out the 428 CJ's secrets. The first modification was usually headers and slicks. That alone could drop times into the mid-12s. Add a bigger cam and some carburetor tuning, and 11-second passes were possible. The most radical builds with tunnel ram intakes and roller cams could dip into the 10s, territory that required serious race engines just a few years earlier. But perhaps the most impressive thing about the 428 Cobra Jet was its psychological impact. Ford had been the underdog in the muscle car wars. Chevy had cubic inches and racing heritage. Chrysler had the Hemi mystique. But with the 428 CJ, Ford proved that smart engineering could beat brute force. They showed that a well-designed engine didn't need exotic parts or massive displacement to dominate. None of the insurance companies eventually caught on. By 1970, they figured out that 335 horsepower Cobras were somehow running faster than 425 horsepower Hemis. Rates skyrocketed. Combined with increasing emissions regulations and the end of the muscle car era, the 428 Cobra Jet's production run was short. The last 428 CJ rolled off the assembly line in 1970, replaced by the larger but less aggressive 429 Cobra Jet. Today, 428 Cobra Jet cars are among the most sought-after muscle cars in existence. A numbers-matching 428 CJ Mustang can command six figures at auction. Torino Cobras, once considered budget muscle, now trade for serious money. Even the luxury Cougar Eliminators have become valuable collectibles. The engine that Ford claimed made only 335 horsepower has become one of the most valuable power plants of the muscle car era. The legacy of the 428 Cobra Jet extends far beyond its 3-year production run. It proved that displacement wasn't everything. It showed that proper intake and exhaust flow could overcome a cubic inch disadvantage. It demonstrated that a street engine could be both powerful and practical. Modern Ford performance engines like the Coyote V8 follow the same philosophy: sophisticated heads, excellent breathing, and conservative compression ratios that allow for boost or aggressive timing. Entering the 428 CJ also established Ford's reputation for sandbagging. To this day, Ford tends to underrate their performance engines. The modern Shelby GT500 is rated at 760 horsepower, but routinely dynos higher. The GT350's Voodoo engine makes more than its advertised 526 horsepower. This tradition of underpromising and overdelivering started with the 428 Cobra Jet, and looking back, the 428 Cobra Jet represents a perfect moment in automotive history. It was the right engine at the right time. The muscle car wars demanded innovation, and Ford delivered with unconventional thinking. Instead of chasing cubic inches or exotic technology, they focused on making existing parts work better together. The result was an engine that punched far above its weight class and earned its place in the pantheon of great American V8s. And the technical lessons from the 428 CJ are still relevant today. Airflow velocity matters more than port size. Compression ratios need to match fuel quality and intended use. Torque at usable RPM beats peak horsepower numbers. These fundamentals haven't changed, even as technology has advanced. Whether you're building a naturally aspirated V8 or a turbocharged 4-cylinder, the principles proven by the 428 Cobra Jet still apply. The human story behind the 428 CJ is equally important. Bob Tasca didn't accept mediocrity. He saw a problem and solved it himself. Ford's engineers didn't let pride prevent them from learning from a dealer. They took Tasca's concept and refined it into a production reality. This collaboration between racers, dealers, and manufacturers created something greater than any group could have achieved alone. Then the 428 Cobra Jet also democratized performance. At a time when exotic engines were becoming increasingly expensive and temperamental, Ford delivered supercar performance at a working-class price. A factory worker could afford a Torino Cobra. A young insurance salesman could finance a Cobra Jet Mustang. This wasn't just about going fast. It was about making speed accessible to regular people. Think about the cultural impact for a moment. The 428 CJ powered some of the most iconic muscle cars ever built. These weren't just machines. They were symbols of American optimism and power. Every time a 428 CJ Mustang embarrassed a more expensive rival at a stoplight, it reinforced the idea that smart engineering could overcome any disadvantage. That's a fundamentally American concept. The 428 Cobra Jet story is really about potential versus perception. On paper, 335 horsepower shouldn't have been enough to run with the big dogs. The specs suggested a mid-pack performer. But Ford knew something the competition didn't. They knew that racing isn't won on paper. It's won by whoever gets to the finish line first. And the 428 Cobra Jet got there first, more often than anyone expected. And as we look at modern performance cars with their computer-controlled everything and laboratory-precise engineering, there's something refreshing about the 428 CJ's honesty. It was a mechanical masterpiece. No computers, no variable valve timing, no direct injection, just excellent airflow, proper cam timing, and an optimal compression ratio. It proved that fundamental engineering excellence beats technological complexity. The next time you see a 1969 Mach 1 or a Torino Cobra at a car show, take a moment to appreciate what you're looking at. That 428 Cobra Jet under the hood isn't just an engine, it's a testament to clever engineering, strategic thinking, and the power of challenging conventional wisdom. It's proof that sometimes the best solution isn't the most obvious one. And it's a reminder that in the world of performance, what matters isn't what the spec sheet says. It's what happens when you drop the hammer. And so was the 428 Cobra Jet really making just 335 horsepower? Not a chance. But that creative interpretation of the truth gave Ford one of the greatest sleeper engines in automotive history. It allowed regular people to afford extraordinary performance, and it created a legacy that still influences engine design today. Sometimes the best engineering includes a little strategic deception. The 428 Cobra Jet proved that, beyond any doubt. And what's your take on Ford's strategic horsepower rating? Genius marketing or misleading customers? Drop a comment below and let me know what you think about this legendary sandbagger. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most underrated engines in muscle car history, make sure to subscribe for more stories about the machines that changed automotive history. Until next time, keep those engines turning, and remember, it's not about what the factory claims, it's about what crosses the finish line first.